All right, I've got that it's 6:30, and I'll go ahead and just remind everyone, well, what I'll do first, skip a few more people a chance to wander in, but thank you all for coming tonight. We are commencing with the 2021 Lane County Master Gardeners Association seminar program. We are still using Zoom, and at the present time, we anticipate using Zoom in these remote seminar format for whatever part of the year, all of 2021 into the summer. We just don't know, but we were pleased with how much support we got and attendance last year, and it's great to see so many people coming back for a Zoom seminar. We offer these most months of the year. This is our first. They're the third Tuesday of the month. We've moved the time up to 6:30. They used to start at 7, but we're starting at 6:30. Seemed to just work out better for many of the people who've been attending and our speakers. So we are still working on filling the seminar schedule, so you haven't seen anything akin to the bookmark, but we will soon have the entire year filled, and you'll see that information, of course, in the Garden Gate and however else Jet shares our publicity. So want to go ahead and get started. It is a webinar. We will be recording it, but as a webinar, none of the attendees, your names or anything shows up. And after a few days, we'll get it posted online. You're all muted and your video is off. What we would ask is that as questions come up, please type them into the chat, okay? If you'll type them into the chat, Chuckie has left time at the end of the seminar for questions. And she also, I'll just let you know ahead of time, she's got a number of slides that reference various publications from the extension catalog. I will post those links as they come up. So don't frantically try to figure out or write down the title of them. We'll post them in the chat. And I'll quit with that and let Chuckie get started. Chuckie has been an Oregon Master Gardener since 2016. She moved to Oregon from Wyoming, always wanted to be a Wyoming Master Gardener, but it never fit her schedule. But she did work for over 20 years with the owners of Sweetwater Gardens in Riverton, Wyoming, specializing in perennials. And since 2016 and becoming a Master Gardener, she has her Sustainable Gardening Badge, her Adaptive Gardening Badge, and she's a Plant Diagnostics Master Gardener. And so at this point, I'll stop and give it to you, Chuckie. Thank you so much for giving this talk today.
You're so welcome. And I'd like to thank all of you that are listening tonight. And I hope that you learned something from this. This is my first webinar ever, so we'll see how we do. I just wanted to go back to the slide that's showing here at the beginning of the my presentation. This is my yard. These are my raised beds that I have. I have 5. I have 4 like this, and one you can't see back in the corner over here behind this grape arbor that has asparagus and rhubarb in it. And I have these arches for vertical gardening, because sometimes I might be mentioning those things. I also can tell you pretty much the names of any plants you see if anybody's curious about something they see as we're going through here. But with that, I'll get started. I was visiting with Sharon a while back, and she said, you know, they give a lot of talks, you guys give a lot of talks about raised beds and all the different kinds of raised beds and how to build them and everything. And she said, so I did that. And the first year, it was just marvelous. And then the next year, not so good. What happened? So that's what this is all about. So here we go. A really good place to start is the OSU Extension Catalog. If you know how to use it, and I do have to say, It's not the most user-friendly when you're searching for things, but if you're persistent, you can find something really good on almost any topic. And the one that I would start with is this one called, I'm in the way, raised bed gardening, which is all of the information that Sharon was talking about. But if you go to the page 5 of this particular document, it does talk about caring for your plants in the raised garden, and it does talk about maintaining beds and walkways in there, but it's just a short little blip. So I'm going to try to go into it in a little more detail, but this is a good place to start. And there is some information on this topic in that particular document. So the bottom line is soil, and you're probably all, oh yeah, okay. But if you don't have good soil and it's not the kind of soil that your plants need, nothing's going to happen. So here we have a bed that looks like it's in need of some amendments. And here we have soil that's like you want it to look. And a good way to find out what you have is to do a jar test. If you don't want to take the time to go out and have a soil, have an actual soil test done, you can do this. You can go online to jar tests for soil types, and there's all sorts of information out there on the internet how to actually do this, but it's really simple and it'll give you a really quick idea of what you're dealing with if you don't already know. The thing about raised beds is vegetables require a lot of nutrients. Like this little guy here, this is a cucamelon, or some people call them Mexican sour gherkins. This guy comes up early in the spring and he gets this tall on one of my arches here in about 3 weeks. It grows really fast. It needs a lot of nutrients. So they grow really fast. Almost all your vegetables, my raised beds are a combination of flowers and vegetables, but they'll take from 25 to 100 days. That's not very long. And because of that, you're going to have to add nitrogen, phosphate, and potash as needed. And how do you know if you need nitrogen, phosphate, or potash? Well, you can go on and if you just research nutrient deficiencies or signs of phosphate deficiency or potash deficiency, it'll give you a whole list of things that to look for. One of the things is if you have red or purplish blots, you have loss of older leaves, if plants are stunted or the color of the leaves become darker green than normal, you probably have phosphate deficiency. Whereas if potassium kind of moves around fast in the root system, and they're going to show the symptoms of yellowish tissue around the leaf edges. So a lot of times I don't necessarily go in and get another soil test. If my plants aren't doing well, I'll look at the plants and try to read them to figure out what I need to do. So you're going to get your soil ready for your vegetables. Ideally, your soil needs to be deep, especially if you want root vegetables like carrots or parsnips, things that go down, and you want them to have a nice shape and not be deformed, you need it to be deep. It needs to be easily worked. That means you should be able to get in there with your hand tools and easily manipulate the soil and well drained. And the advantage of your raised beds is they're usually, they drain well. You want about a 5% organic matter. And on this particular subject, when I first moved here, every year I just kept adding more organic matter and I couldn't figure out why my seeds wouldn't germinate. Well, you need organic matter. You definitely need organic matter, but too much of it can be not a good thing. And I'll give you a site here in a minute where you can get some more information about that. But you don't want it all organic matter. You do need some dirt. And One of the ways I add dirt is, or soil, I guess I shouldn't call it dirt, I should call it soil. Add soil is, we have molehills. We've tried everything. We still have molehills. I go out and I scoop that really nice, finely tilled, beautiful black soil in a bucket and I sprinkle it around on my beds. So I'm always adding more soil in addition to organic matter. And organic matter is going to be your own compost or compost that you can purchase like at Rexius or Lane or other places, or buy in bags from box stores. Okay, before you plant, the first year I had I was in this yard, I actually had soil tests done, so I knew where I was starting. I could tell that it was really nice because it was really dark and it was easy to work with and everything just grew huge. So I was pretty sure that I had good soil, and I do. I live on the McKenzie Valley and I have river loam, so I'm spoiled. Vegetables vary, but most want a pH between 6.2 and 6.8, which is slightly acidic. And here's a little chart you can see, shows, but that's a pretty good range. That's for most things, but you still need to read packages, and seed packages and plant labels have almost all the information you need somewhere, but pay attention to this. If this is for vegetables, they're a little pickier than a lot of flowers. This is an address that Erica shared with me on the percentage of organic matter, what's good and what's bad and how much you need. So this particular site is where you can go to find out about organic matter. Okay, to know the pH of your soil, you need to get it tested. And unfortunately right now, because of COVID, the extension's not offering soil tests, but as soon as, COVID gets under control and you can come back to the extension office, then it's a service we add when we're back to normal again, whenever that happens. But this particular publication has all of the labs that you can send your soil samples off to, if that's something you want to do. It's EM8677. And like Sharon said, I'm popping a lot of these up here, but she will have that information for you that you can get at the end. There's some other publications that you might find also useful. There's a guide to collecting soil samples, EC 628, that tells you how to go about doing it because, well, there are several ways to do it right and do it wrong. And this particular document will help you actually do a good job of getting a good soil sample so the results are bad. Then once you get it back, sometimes they're a little mystifying, all the things they tell you. Sometimes it's more information than you want. But EC 1478, this one will tell you what all of that documentation that you get means when you get it back. And then there's this one, which is what you do in your garden. EC 1503, once you have the results, that's this one here. Fertilizing your garden, vegetables, fruits, and vegetables. And this gives you fertilizer recommendations based on your soil tests. So, and it has it for vegetables, fruits, ornamental shrubs, flowers, caneberries, strawberries, etc. So it's also an excellent resource if you're wanting to know what to do once you have the results. If you want to raise your pH, you need to use liming materials. And there's two ways you can do that. You can use lime, which is calcium carbonate. It's also known as agricultural lime or ag lime. Or you can use dolomite, which is calcium magnesium carbonate, also known as dolomite lime. Okay, both are available as a powder or prilled. If you use powder, you need to wear a mask typically because it poofs up and is kind of hard to deal with. If you get prilled, if you're wearing a glove or something, it's something you can spread and it's just easier to use, I think. but that's what prilled means. And then another thing is this is something you usually add in the fall, and you do not want to add nitrogen and lime at the very same time. You need to add your nitrogen first, and then wait 2 or 3 weeks before you add your lime if you're amending your garden in the fall. Okay, and then the other thing is that they recommend is every other year or every third year, switch back and forth between lime and dolomite. So you get a balance of things there. If you're going to lower the pH in your garden, which is, you know, you want to increase the acidity of the soils, like hydrangeas, if you don't have a nice acid soil, blueberries, lots of things they don't produce, or the colors aren't right. But if you want to increase the acidity, you add elemental sulfur, which you can get in any garden supply store. You add it in the spring, not the fall, and incorporation, which means working it into the soil, not just sprinkling it on top, because soil bacteria convert the sulfur to sulfuric acid and but to lower the pH. And then it's a slow process, it's biological, it's not a chemical reaction, which would be quick. And so the bacteria are active to make this happen, and the soil has to be moist and warm. The soil temperature needs to be above 55 or nothing happens. So they're not, these bacteria are not active in the winter. So if you put it on in the fall, it's not as effective as doing it in the spring. This is another OSU publication, EC 1516, which tells you all about acidifying your soil if you want more information than that, because there are quite a few fruits and flowers that are affected a lot by how acid the soil is. Okay, so now we're getting ready. We have good soil and we want to keep it that way. And how am I going to keep my bed going? If on and on and on and on. This is another photo from my garden. This is winter kale. And I can tell here that it's spring because the irises have not been cut back, which I would do as soon as they're blooming. The kale is still left over from winter. I had it growing all winter, and I planted marigolds. I planted them early in the spring, but I want to keep it. This is like just this last spring. So now I built my raised beds in 2016, and so I've been using them for 4 years, and I have really good luck with them every year. Other than the second year I had them, none of my seeds germinated because I didn't have enough soil. I had too much compost, I found out. So here's what I do in the fall. I harvest all my tender crops. I pull up all dead and unproductive plants. And then I add 2 to 3 inches of compost. And this is the part when Sharon said, well, it was really good. I had really, really, really good soil the first year, and I just had bumper crops and everything was wonderful. And then the next year, not so good. Well, your raised beds drain well, which means they leach a lot of the stuff out, plus the fact that all of your vegetables and flowers that you've planted there are using up all the nutrients in the soil, so that's kind of depleted. So you do have to amend them every year, just like it was any other type of garden. And then what I do is I shred fallen leaves from my garden. And I will say one thing about leaves. I have a giant maple tree, and I use all of those leaves somewhere. I don't give them away. I don't haul them away. I leave them on some of my beds. I shred them, and I top dress part of my raised beds with them. And some of them I put in bags that I punch holes in and keep turning to make leaf mold. And But some of my beds, I use a cold frame. Now this little cold frame at the back over here, it is in my garden all winter typically. This year is not a typical year because of the holiday farm fire up here this year. I had to get rid of everything that was in the garden. The smoke was so heavy, and it wasn't just wood smoke. We had a lot of buildings burn, and there was a lot of nasty stuff in the smoke. So I had to pull everything that I didn't eat anything that was affected by it. I cut everything back. There's strawberries in these pockets here, and I've cut them all the way down to the ground and washed them really well in addition to the rain. And but typically in this little bed here, I can raise spinach and lettuce all winter, enough for the two of us, and it keeps us going. So this will cover 1/2 of one of my beds. So if I wanted to build more of these, I could cover all of my raised beds with these cold frames. Instead, I like them because I can lift it off, and the lid, it lifts up. I find it easier than hoops, although some people like a hoop garden. I just like the ease of this, and it's just what you prefer. They both work the same, but it extends your garden a lot. But this is what my garden looks like during the winter. The other thing about maintaining your beds is I have a wide enough for my wagon and my wheelbarrow to go all the way around my beds. That's just, this particular bark is when eWeb comes by and chips all the trees that are under the lines. They will dump the chips in your driveway for free if you ask them. And that's what I use on my walkways. I would not use it to mulch my beds because you're not always sure what's in it, but it works great for walkways. And that's what I have down here. The other thing I do in the fall is I cover the top of the bark mulch here with slug bait like Sluggo, because they will climb right up here. I didn't know when I first moved to Oregon that how many things they loved, and I had no idea they loved marigolds until I planted them and went out the next day and all I had was toothpicks, and I went, not sure what this is about. Well, I found out, and so now I keep it at the base, and that seems to have solved my problem with the slugs. The other thing you can do at the end of the season is plant cover crops, or they're called green manure crops. They help prevent soil erosion. They help suppress weeds. They build productive soil. And there's a couple of, I keep moving the little pictures around so I can see my screen. A couple of publications that have some good information about cover crops. This is a teacher's guide, which had some fun stuff. And then there's also one that's just specifically cover crops. The cover crops could be a whole class in itself. And I do believe Erica gave us a talk on cover crops a while back that was wonderful. Cover crops, they're grains or grasses or legumes that will grow during the fall and winter that you can plow, spade, or till under in the spring. And when you read this, you go, well, it's kind of hard to plow or spade by raised beds. So granted, yes, it has to be, you're going to want to choose one that you can dig in there with your garden, your small garden spade, or whatever it is you use to turn dirt over in your raised beds, or at least have something that you can cut off or pull up if you are doing like lasagna gardening and you're a no dig type person, which is a whole nother topic, but you have to be able to pick something that you can cut and dig up on your own. They're typically grown until they flower, and then you cut or mow them, and so your little pruners or your scissors or whatever you use to cut things back and trim things, has to be something that you can do that. Then you work the stems and the foliage into the soil so they can break down, and then wait 2 to 3 weeks before you plant. They're also called catch crops because in Oregon it rains so much, and this might be one of the better reasons for planting them, because what they do is they catch and use the nitrogen and other minerals that the winter rains normally would leach away, and it protects your soil. So it's a great way to protect your soil. You can do winter cover crops or you can do summer. Winter cover crops, they suppress your weeds in your unused bed. And if you're going to plant a winter cover crop, you need to find your frost date, or and you need to work back because your cover crop needs to be planted early enough so that you have at least 4 weeks for it to grow before the cold weather stops the growth. And you can plant large seeded cover crops like peas, vetch, and wheat in shallow, closely spaced furrows. And if you have a small seeded crop like ryegrass or buckwheat, you can just broadcast it over the surface and then kind of rake it lightly. A good choice for, and this is the one I like, for a winter cover crop is crimson clover. And I have my crimson clover here, and it's about, I don't know if you've never planted a cover crop, it's a pretty, I don't know if you can see this or not. It's a pretty, I can't see my picture, large seed. And I would, but I broadcast it. I haven't ever just planted it in rows. I just kind of broadcast it. And I think it's really pretty. And then, just before it starts to go to seed, you just cut it back and leave it there. A summer crop, you can plant it whenever you want in the summer. It revitalizes your garden soil that needs to rest during the growing season. So if you have, one thing about a raised bed is there are several topics that once you start growing things, you need to rotate, and then some people do succession crops. But if one of your beds is your bed that's resting on your rotation, that's a good place to put a summer cover crop. And it has the added advantage of attracting beneficial insects. And if you plant buckwheat between the rows in the summer, just before it goes to seed, you can pull it up, and then you can just lay it down on top of the soil between your vegetables, and it acts like an organic mulch. So it serves a lot of good purposes. So this is kind of a fun thing, plant a row of vegetables and plant some buckwheat, or plant buckwheat around the outside edges is what I do sometimes, or vice versa, put a row of it down the middle and plant vegetables around the outside, and then, cut it back before it goes to seed. You don't want to plant these. You don't want to plant rye, winter hardy cereals, or red clover because they grow real aggressive and they're really hard to get rid of if you lose control of them. So you want to avoid those. So there is a really good document on cover crops for the home gardens, and it's FS 304. But if you go to page 2, there's a table, and I tried to figure out how to show you that table, but my tech skills weren't good enough. So what it has on that page is it has all the types of cover crops, whether they're legumes or non-legumes, how much to sow, when to sow them, when to turn them under, the effects they have, and then any special notes that they think you might want to know about. But this particular a publication from OSU has a lot of great information you can check out. Now, the last thing you can do is have a winter garden. And having a winter garden is a whole topic in itself. But there's an excellent publication. It's PNW 548 on fall and winter vegetable gardening in the Pacific Northwest, and it'll give you plants. It has anything you need to know pretty much about planting a winter garden. And this year I don't have a winter garden because of the fire, but a lot of times I do have a winter garden. And before I was a master gardener, this was my favorite resource. Nikki Gardens off the coast of Nova Scotia, and I actually took this book with me when I took the master gardening classes when we were doing the vegetable class, and all of my notes that they gave me in the master gardener class are written in the margins of this book. The reason I like this book so much is she grows a lot of unusual crops, and for every vegetable discussed, she provides this. She has, this one's for kale, but this is at the bottom of each page of vegetables. You just need to know when your last spring frost date is and when your first fall frost date is. And, you know, that varies here in the Willamette Valley from like, the first frost date can be anywhere from October 1st to the end of October, depending on whether you're a 7, 8, or 9 zone. Plus it's warming up now, so nothing's a true story anymore. And then your spring frost, usually around here, zone 7's like March 11th to the 20th, all the way through like the 21st to the 31st for zone 8, and then zone 9 is like, can be April 1st to 10th, depending on, you know, where you are. Up in my yard, I have an interesting situation. My backyard is on the river. My front yard is on the north side of the house. My backyard is a zone warmer than my front yard because the river moderates the temperature. It never gets as cold back there, and it never gets as hot. There'll be frost on the front yard and not on the backyard. It's interesting. So now we're moving on to maintaining your pots and your containers. This picture here on the side is one of my my pots, my containers that's on the deck. And in my yard, I have a few containers tucked in my vegetable garden and around them and in my perennial beds. But most of my pots are on my back patio. Small pots I find are expensive and high maintenance, but I love them. Most of mine are planted with annuals. You can plant perennials. The cordyline that's in here, I take it out and give it a root pruning every year and stick it back in. It grows year round if I protect it. And so it's kind of a tender perennial. I'm sure a lot of you have things like that. But for the most part, I plant them with annuals and then they're done for the year. Because they're a small pot, because they're annuals, they need a lot of nutrients. They just need a lot. And usually by the end of the season, pots are completely root bound, or mine are, or there's little soil left. So I'll go to pull them out and think, oh, I'm gonna recycle the soil in the bottom. Well, there's no soil left on the bottom. But I will put the root ball in the compost and I'll knock off any soil that's left, because that soil can stay in the bottom half of your pot. It's expensive to fill your pot every year, but you need to start with new soilless potting mix every year in your pots, just because it's used up by the end of the season. There's a few things you can do to save money, and if you have a lot of pots, you probably know this, but you can take the soil from the last year's pots and put it in the bottom half, or you can switch the soil between, if you're worried about diseases, like you can knock the soil from the bottom of your flower pot into the bottom of your tomato pot, because tomatoes need to move every year. Also, like tomatoes planted in pots are usually going to need some soil, not just soilless mixture, because it's lacking in calcium. You'll find that out if you try to grow tomatoes, especially in pots. And every plant and vegetable is different, but that one comes to mind because a lot of people try it. So what I do is fill the bottom half of your pots with something else. This is my favorite method. As I'm buying all my new annuals, I very carefully take them out and set them in a box and turn all of the containers upside down in the bottom. It'll still drain, but it takes up, depending on the size of the pot, 4 to 6 inches of the bottom pot that I don't have to fill with soil then. So as you can see here, most of your annuals only need about 6 inches of soil to grow in. So this is wasted. Now, if you put peanuts down here, it works lovely until you go to dump your pot. So I highly recommend that those peanuts are in something like the net bag that you get your potatoes in or something works really well, or even burlap. But I would contain them in something, otherwise you're picking them out. They're blowing across the yard. They're in the soil that you don't want them. I like peanuts, but I only like them when they're contained. So just a couple of things. This is a wheelbarrow of mine that I have with annuals in it, and I completely dump it out, but the soil, any soil that's left goes in the bottoms of not next year's pots or out on one of my beds. And then the tops go, you know, in the compost. A couple of things about they need to be watered and fertilized really regular. The pots that you've seen get watered every day, sometimes twice a day, because I do not have them on a drip line. Because you water them so often, it depletes all the nutrients. And the best way to water your planters, make sure they stay lush like this, is you water them until the water runs through, and then you wait. I water them all once that way, then you wait and you go back and you water them a second time, because otherwise it gives the soil a chance to hydrate and kind of fluff out. And then the next time you water, it doesn't all run through as fast. And so it gets a better watering. I learned that working at the greenhouse, watered everything twice. You have to fertilize on a regular basis if you want them to be full and lush. And for me, that means I add a slow release fertilizer, like the pellets of Osmocote or something similar, actually mixed into the soil. And then once a week, I add a water soluble fertilizer. And when I have just flowers, I usually use a fertilizer that's like 0, 10, 10, if you're familiar with the numbers on the side of your chemicals and fertilizers. So no nitrogen, because I want good roots and lots of flowers. Now, if I was going to have vegetables in here, I'd probably switch to 511, which is more nitrogen. It just depends on what you're growing in your pot. You need to pay attention to the numbers on the fertilizer and adjust accordingly. But I definitely fertilize every week, and I've put slow release fertilizer in all my pots as I planted them. If you want to keep them looking great, these are some. I picked this one because these are perennial grasses in the back here. This is an orange carex, and this is like going on 5 years. And what I do to these every year is I pull them out. I root prune them, which means sometimes I cut them in half. They start to get too big, and then I go down and I cut like the bottom half of the roots out and chop around the outside edges. I'm not very nice. I use the hori and just saw through them. If they look like they have still some space to grow, I'll pull them up like a ponytail, and I will just cut like 2 or 3 inches off around under the bottom of the outside edge. These particular grasses, and there's some others too, if you give them a haircut, they never look nice again. They always just look kind of funky, I found. So you can divide them and you can trim around the outsides, but they don't do well with the haircut. But these come back year after year, and I love them. These, the cordylan in the middle, I can save. I can root prune it, which means I take it out and cut the root back. And I might put it back in this pot with new soil and stick it in a safe place up, like on the south side of my house under the eave, and mulch it. Or I might set it if you had a greenhouse or something and keep it going. But the coleus and the begonias here, and I don't have a greenhouse, so they're toast. You could take cuttings from both of these and have new starts for the next year. I don't, because I don't have a place to do that. But to keep these nice, they get pinched back. Starting about July, they get pinched back like, oh, the top 2 or 3 leaves every week. And the same thing, I pinch these back to keep them looking full. And when I say check for diseases and pests on a regular basis, for me, that's every day when I'm watering. I'm always just looking. Okay, and every day I carry a bucket around and I deadhead and I prune anything that doesn't look nice, and the more you prune, the more you deadhead, the more flowers you get. And this is a really hard one for people that have, especially if they have hanging baskets and stuff. But at the end of July, you just cut them back a good third. It'll cut all the flowers off for the most part. But what'll happen is in a couple of weeks, they'll bush out again and get all new flowers, and they'll last another couple months. Whereas if you don't do anything, they just start to get scraggly looking eventually, for the most part. A lot of them do. So it says, give me a second here. Sorry, I gotta leave for a minute. Sorry about that. Had to put the cat out. She wanted to walk on my keyboard. Okay, I suggest you become familiar with the OS extension site and the catalog. That's where all of these publications that I've put up are from. And if you go to extension.oregonstate.edu/lane and then type in catalog, it'll come up. And there's tons and tons of publications on anything that you can think of. Blueberries, rhubarb. This one has all this is a wonderful document on all vegetables. And the needs for vegetables are the same whether you're in a raised bed pretty much, or if you're in a regular garden. And then this one here is also addresses their organic matter situation. One thing about the only difference between in the ground, a couple of things that you need to think about is raised beds drain faster, so they dry out faster. And in the fall, if you're going to do a winter garden, they also get colder. So they need, if you're going to have a winter garden and you're going to have frost and you want to cover it with a frost cloth, they need a little more protection than like in ground. The same thing in ground. So that's just another little difference between the raised beds and in the ground. Assess your garden spaces, do your research. I read a lot, keep a journal and take notes. And I really believe this. I wanted to show you, I think I'm gonna try and hold it up here. What did I do with it? I have a 10-year garden journal. I thought I had it laying right here. It seems to have walked away now. No, it didn't. Okay, it's from, I don't know if you can see this. I have a garden journal. It's a 10-year journal and it's from Lee Valley. And one of the things I have in here is I draw my vegetable beds every year and I keep track of what I planted in my raised beds because you want to rotate them and you want to remember what you planted in each bed. I can't remember if I don't have a picture. So I don't know if you can see this good enough or not, but does it show up? I don't know.
Hold it up a little, maybe get a little bit back from your camera and hold it up.
Okay, there, is it showing now?
A little higher.
A little higher?
Yep.
Can you see it?
Oops, no, we're getting your background, which is sometimes a problem. That's pretty good.
Okay.
That'll give people an idea, Chuckie. That's good.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
No worries.
Anyway, I have a garden journal like that, but I also keep a garden journal where I have my yard divided into 8 different, what I call garden rooms. And I keep a notebook with all of my, I don't know, this probably won't show either then. I have a notebook like, it doesn't want to do this, does it? There you go. A 3-ring binder like this for each part of my garden. And inside of here are all of my labels from all my plants that I bought with notes about where I planted them and if they did well, or if it's something I shouldn't plant again. And so that'll help you decide what's going on with your garden. I keep a lot of records of stuff and I enjoy that. I just, some kind of a journal, keep a record of what works and what doesn't work. I find really, really useful. And like this little picture, there's no gardening mistakes, only experiments. So that's kind of it. I hope I have some questions. Okay, I'll leave this up here, but I have left some time now to answer questions. So that's where I am now.
That was perfectly timed. Thanks very much, Chuckie. I'm going to let Juliet handle the questions.
We do have a few here. At one point, Chuckie, you mentioned that 5% of your soil should be organic matter. And Robert is asking, is organic matter the compost?
Yes, it is compost, but it can be, you know, it could be a compost like you buy from Lane or Rexius or in a bag, or it could be just the compost that you've built in your own compost pile, or it might just be your cover crops turned under. But yes, it's organic matter, whereas like soilless mixes don't have soil in them. And how do I explain? Yes, it's organic matter is anything growing that's broken down, but it should be, you should be able to work it with your hands if it's good at, you know, although on lasagna gardening, you just put it down in layers, anything, you know, green and then brown and green and brown in the layers like you would a compost pile, and it just breaks down in your soil and it's no till. What they found out, and some of the OSU has done some studies, is if you have too much compost, too much organic matter can be not necessarily a good thing. It can be too much. And Erica, when I was first making this slideshow, I said up to 5%, and she recommended that I say 5%, because you need soil also. You need to add soil to your raised beds in addition to compost. But yes, okay. Does that answer the question?
I think so. At one point you mentioned about soil testing, and you mentioned that you can go to various labs to do that. The question here is, aren't there home testing kits that you can do for soil testing?
There are home testing kits. Some are good, some are not so good. They're not as accurate as having a lab do them. You know, depends. I would recommend using we can't do it now because we're closed for COVID, but when you would come to the extension, ours is only pH. Whereas if you send your soil off to one of those labs, that you're going to get a lot of information beside the pH. And that's why you kind of they're more complicated to interpret. But yes, there are home soil tests. You know, the honest truth is I spent the money on a soil test when I first came here because the soil looks so different than where I came from, and I wanted to know where I started. But since then, what I actually do is what I call read my plants. You know, I look to see what's happening in the garden, and then I pay attention to the symptoms, and I kind of mention some of those You know, if you Google, you know, or you call the plant clinic and say, hey, this is what it looks like. And then the plant clinic, you know, we're not there at the extension now, but we are online. And you can call us or email us, and there's people working and they can help with those questions. But yes, there are soil tests. I would recommend a lab if you really want to know. But they'll give you a ballpark figure probably.
There's another question about, you had mentioned that on top of your raised beds, you put your leaves. And the question is, how do you, and you shred them. How do you go about shredding those leaves?
I run the lawnmower over them. I rake them out onto the grass and run the lawnmower over them, and then dump them out and run the lawnmower over them again. Some of the times, if I want to put them someplace where I want them to break down, actually the ones that you saw there on that picture of my raised beds, let me see if I can, how do I get back? Can I do this? I think I can. Well, let me see, let me try something. Oops. I don't know if I can get back to the beginning. Yeah, here we go. Up here. Now, can you see it?
Yes.
Can you see it? Okay, and I think if I go like this, there. Okay. Oh, that one doesn't show it. Let me zip through here. Sorry about this. I'm not very good at this. I'm trying to find that picture so I could show you what I did. I'm wasting your time. Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry, that took so long. I use the lawnmower, but also what I do sometimes is I don't even worry about shredding them if all I want to do is put them on here, because I will tell you that in the spring, I don't leave this huge thick layer of leaves on my garden and plant it, because it takes a lot of nutrients out of the soil to break down that much brown. So what I have a tendency to do is take them off and put them in big black garbage bags, poke holes in them, and let them get really moldy. I turn them every day and just let them make leaf mold, and then I put it back on. And then I don't worry about shredding them. If you shred them, I have other beds, like in-ground beds, that I put them on there and I don't worry about taking them off. I just cover them up with new compost in the spring. Is that?
Okay. There's another question here. You had mentioned about your pots, how you use the soilless potting mix that you put in the bottom. And the question is, what is soilless potting mix versus soil?
Okay. Well, soil is has clay and sand and compost, and soilless potting mix actually doesn't have any soil in it. It's just a combination of man-made, I don't want to say chemicals, that's not the right term, but it actually doesn't have any soil in it at all. And so if you go to a garden center to buy, or if you go to like Rexius or Lane Forest to buy bulk, they have, it's made especially for pots, soilless. And the reason you want soilless is it will not have any weeds in it, and it will not have any insect larvae, or it won't have any my mind is blank. You won't have problems with other things growing in and diseases. Whereas if you fill your pots with soil, you're going to have other things to deal with. Plus, it's not going to be rich enough. They won't do as well. there's not enough nutrients in it. That's not a very good explanation, is it? Sorry.
I think it's good.
Okay.
The next question is, this person has a forested area on her new property, and she's wondering if she can use that soil in her raised beds.
It depends on what the soil is. I would say on mine, I don't have a picture of it, but when I built my raised beds, this strip where they are was lawn, was sod, and I took it all out. And what I did is I put the sod in the bottom upside down. I turned it over. I cut it out and put it inside the beds upside down. The bottom half, because it's really expensive to buy that much soil or potting mix or whatever you're going to compost that you're going to put in there. They actually have a mixture that's for raised beds and it's not all compost and it's not just soil, it's a combination. It's a garden bedding mix. And I would say that would be okay in the bottom half, but probably not the top half, because I don't think it's going to have enough nutrients for a vegetable garden. But it would be fine probably to get, just like in the pots where we filled at the bottom half with some, something, you could fill the bottom half of this as long as it's something that's going to drain. You want them to continue to drain. Like I wouldn't fill them full of pure clay. I would avoid that. It depends on what the soil is in the forest. The duff and all of that, I'd say that's fine in the bottom half.
Okay. Another question here from Sharon is, what is the best material to use to build a raised bed? How wide should it be and how tall?
Okay. You're pretty much unlimited there. Mine are built out of cinder blocks, and my only caution on cinder blocks is mine aren't mortared. So if you're really, really unsteady, you would probably want to mortar them. I chose these because I could build it myself one at a time. Also, they don't rot. And as far as how wide, the older you get, the reason I have raised beds is because I have a bucket I sit on, and I can sit on the bucket and I can reach the middle of my beds without bending. If I just sit up straight and put my arms out, I can reach the middle of my bed. That's how I decided how wide to make it. How high depends on how tall you are. Whether I don't want to bend over, that's the part that bothers me. So I started them out shorter than this, and I found that I had to bend over more. So then the next year I added another row, because then I could sit and work on them without bending on my bench. So it depends on your height and how far your reach is. These are 4 by 8. And between them is 4 feet so that I can do a wheelbarrow, or eventually it's wide enough for a wheelchair, not that I'm there, but I could put pavers down eventually and I could move around in here for if I was handicapped. I don't foresee that, but you never know at our age. So I would keep that in mind, the space between them. But the height and the width depends on you and your size. Wood, it's really nice and they're beautiful and you can get a lot of kits. It is eventually going to rot. One thing about cinder blocks is you don't want to use old cinder blocks. They had things in them that weren't necessarily good and could leach into your beds. I wouldn't use railroad ties. It has nasty stuff in it that can leach into your beds, especially if you're going to use them for vegetables. Stock tanks work great as long as you make sure you put drain holes along the bottom, and actually along the bottom edge. See where my arrow is here? Is where you want the drain holes, like in stock tanks, rather than in the bottom. You can pretty much use anything that works for you. One thing I didn't do in my beds that I didn't have this problem where I came from, so it didn't occur to me, but I would put hardware cloth, because guess what? Voles and moles go underneath it and they come all the way up to here. Doesn't seem like they would, but they do. Yeah, so someday I'll dig all the dirt out and put that down, but not today. Yeah.
There's another question here about, do you recommend a 3-way or 4-way mix for raised beds?
I guess I'm not sure what they're saying by 3-way or 4-way. Are you saying the three? I'm not sure what they mean by that. What I put in mind was I went to Lane only because it's the one that's closest to me, and I bought the mix that's made for raised vegetable gardens. And if you go and ask either of the places or stores and you read, it will tell you which mix is better for what you plan to put in your raised beds. What's in my raised bed that you can't see, there's a raised bed over here that's all asparagus and rhubarb, and it's manure. Now, I wouldn't do that over here, but that's what the asparagus likes. It gets manure, pure manure every year for the amendment, whereas these get compost and some soil, my molehill soil.
Question here about, do you test each raised bed separately?
If you were going to take a soil test, yes, you would. If I didn't, because I filled them all with the same thing. But if you all of a sudden one of your beds is starting to, the vegetables aren't performing in that bed, yes, but you also wouldn't just take one sample from this bed. You would take a sample from maybe the middle and one over here and one over here and one over here and one over here, and then you would mix them all together. When you take a soil sample, you don't just go out and like, I want to know what the soil in my front lawn is, and you take one. That's what that one document that I had, that how to take a soil sample, it's you have to take it from several places in the area and then mix them together and let it dry. There's a process in order to get an accurate one.
Just a couple more here. About the 5% compost in a raised bed, is there a general rule as to when more compost could be added to maintain the 5%? Well,
I added it 2 different times. I added in the fall when I clean out my beds, because then it has time to work, you know, do its thing and break down more before I plant in the spring. But then I also have vermicompost bins, which if you're not familiar, those are worm bins that I put all my garden waste in. And I get quite a bit from those, a couple, 3 times a year. And whenever I plant plants in my garden, I put vermicompost in the bottom of the hole. So that's when I'm adding the compost. In the fall on the whole bed, and then in the spring as I'm planting, I add, instead of fertilizer, I add vermicompost to the bottom of the planting holes.
You talked about this a bit, but why did you choose cinder block versus wood for raised beds?
2 reasons. I'm not a good carpenter, and I could build these myself without any help. And I had a limited income. So the first year I leveled the ground and put 1 layer. And the next year, when I could afford another, I put a 2nd layer, and I could do it in stages. Also, what I like about this, I don't know if you can tell, but see over here on this one in the back, I can turn them on their sides, and I can plant things along the sides of my bed so they look pretty. It's like this all the way. This is the street. So on the sides facing the street, I have things growing on the side that kind of covers them up. I can also, all the pockets on the top is my strawberry bed. And strawberries really need to be moved, like I'd say every 3 to 5 years. And I don't do that. What I do is I have a series of stakes. And when you give me strawberries, you get a pink stake. And by the end of the season, if you don't have a pink stake, I pull you out and get rid of you. But I also pull every single one of them up, root prune them, and put new compost in the bottom of the hole. new soil for every plant. So that's when I add it.
Okay, one last question here. Suggestions for bringing more soil into the garden if we don't have moles. She's concerned about bringing in soil that is contaminated.
You can buy just soil at the box, like Jerry's or the box stores, or Lowe's, Home Depot, any of those that sell garden stuff. You can buy soil in a bag. You can also go to Rexius and Lane Forest with a 5-gallon bucket if you don't need very much. And they'll sell you a scoop or a bag or a bucket of topsoil. And then you pretty much know what you're getting.
All right, well, that was perfect, perfectly timed. I think get everybody kind of fired up again for the spring, and hopefully ready for the spring. So thank you again, Chuckie. And I just want to also let everyone know that we do have a February seminar set up. Our speaker is from OSU, Jody Einerson. And she will be talking about a community collaborative citizen science program called the Oregon Season Tracker. And this is a program for people who are interested in providing data from your garden or nearby area in terms of rainfall and also botanical phenology. So it's an interesting program that is very much of interest to Oregon state scientists. So we hope you'll join us on the 3rd Tuesday for that. And I realize, I'm sorry, Chuckie, you can't hear everybody clapping. We're getting lots of nice comments, but I want to speak on behalf of everyone to thank you again for a really interesting, lovely, and useful seminar. So thank you for all the time you've put into this, and thank you for this evening.
And you're welcome. Thanks for joining me. Have a good evening.
All righty, we'll see everybody again, hopefully in February. Thank you again for coming.
Mhm.
Well done.
Oh, you know what's weird is all of your little pictures